Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, I have two supervisors, one at the secondary level and one at the elementary. And we thought it might be good to hear from them because, they're in the trenches and they hear a lot from student teachers about ways that, you can be more effective as a cooperating teacher. So let's start off with introductions. Chris, who are you?
Okay. Hello. Who am I? My name is Chris Marple. I am the music education program student teacher supervisor. This is my fifth semester that I've been doing this. So I've directly supervised, I think, 15 students, but I've helped be a mentor to over 30.
Wonderful. All right, Betsy.
Hi, I'm Betsy Starman, and my formal name's Elizabeth, so you see it both ways. I have been supervising student teachers since the spring of 2014. I've had quite a few of them, and I think most of my answers today will reflect patterns that I hear from them in their reflections of the semester.
Great. Well, again, thank you both for joining us. I know it's a crazy time with everything going on, but
Yeah,
this is a very worthwhile uh, talk, I think. So the first
absolutely.
question I have has to do with providing feedback. So what have your student teachers shared with you that's helpful to know in terms of the cooperating teacher providing feedback on their performance as a student teacher?
Chris, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Sure. Thank you. Almost all of my student teachers enjoy when their CT provides constructive feedback. Um, and my advice is to be as specific as possible and try to keep it in the context of the lesson that the student teacher is teaching. So don't try and dump on them several weeks worth of items when they just finished teaching this 10-minute section of a class. So, and if you can be specific, as I mentioned, so avoid comments such as like, I think you can improve your teacher presence, your time management needs work. So that's fine, but can you offer specific feedback that would really help them in the context of your class? And my last comment really is to just be kind. They're humans too, and people, and they're still young and impressionable, and they really are looking up to you and relying on you and your feedback, both positive and constructive things to improve upon. I've had several student teachers who've told me that they are beginning to feel a great deal of anxieties when their CTs give them nothing but negative feedback all the time because they're only saying the things to improve upon when it's really important, just like we would with our own students in elementary or secondary levels. We need to make sure we're pointing out the positives that they're doing just to keep reinforcing them.
Great point.
That was awesome, Chris. I'm just going to piggyback on everything you said. Also applies to elementary, so which of course, um, in regards to remembering kind of where our students are at in life, most of them are still very young and haven't had a lot of authentic experience. And
Hmm.
also, we have to remember that our students are paying for this experience. They're still in school and they're paying tuition at Iowa. So the education that they're getting is being paid for. So that is always in the forefront of my mind too. Everything that Chris said, if you can offer them positives, sometimes some of the strategies or methods that they're using, they don't even know. Like, that's good. That's great. You're already at this place. Like, they don't even recognize how wonderful it
Mm-hmm.
is that they're doing some of the things that they're doing right. So, pointing out
Okay.
those things to reinforce is important. Um, Most of my student teachers tell me that, especially in the beginning, they do feel very overwhelmed. And so, one thing that a couple of student teachers have said to me is, what's hard for me is when my student or my cooperating teacher is trying to give me feedback while I'm still teaching the lesson.
Sure.
And I'm sure that I was probably guilty of that. And they have so much going on, they're just trying to deliver their lesson in a good way. So if we're talking at the side of them, we forget that that can be very overwhelming to them. And the one last thing I would love to say is, I think one thing that several teachers have expressed to me that's really hard for them is if their cooperating teacher keeps comparing them to maybe a former student teacher that they had. And
Mm.
that becomes tough to be compared to somebody that has already been in the classroom and obviously maybe did a really good job. Um, that's hard.
Yeah, great.
Good points. The second question, when and where and how often should a student teacher receive feedback from the cooperating teacher?
Okay, Elizabeth, you want to start with this one off?
You
Sure.
can go every other. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Good turn
I guess
taking, everybody.
we sort of talked about some of those things already. What I hear from my elementary student teachers is they recognize they're going to get a lot of informal feedback, kind of in passing, when you're walking the kids down to music or PE or whatever. But what they would really like is also some formal feedback. So I urge my cooperating teachers to try to sit down and observe a lesson formally, maybe once a week, and give a formal feedback in writing where, maybe you as the cooperating teacher aren't trying to multitask. You truly are just trying to observe the teaching of the student teacher. But I think everybody recognizes that feedback's going to happen a lot of the time informal. But if they can get that balance and have some formal feedback, maybe weekly, that would be great.
Great. My thoughts are is as a CT, mentoring a student teacher is not an easy undertaking. Taking. So I think it's really great that you are helping to mentor these students and our students. The amount of feedback that the CT I think should be providing is quite a bit. Um, that's one of those obligations of the position as a CT is that you are there to help be a mentor, and they need that guidance. The student teacher should work with you to find the time almost after every teaching experience to kind of debrief. And we mentioned it can be daily, weekly, but sometimes there are things that are immediate that you can really mention that will help to reinforce a point that they had taught. I encourage my student teachers to always be asking why, just why. And CTs and student teachers can have mini conversations about the curriculum and assessment and budget planning and balancing life and teaching and all those other things that they might not see or observe on a daily basis. I know for my music education students, if they student teach in the fall, they will observe marching band, but they won't observe directing a jazz choir. And the reverse is true. So there are many things that happen in one semester or another that they would really benefit from your feedback.
And I'll piggyback on to that. Exactly. Our fall elementary students get to see the setup of that classroom. They get to see the training for all the routines and procedures and how you
Hmm.
bring your community together. And the spring student teachers walk into that. So
Right.
I'm like you, Chris. I always tell them there's a rhyme behind every reason, and you should be asking what that is. Why? Why do you do it that way? Where did this come from? Same
Hmm.
same thing.
And I think one more point is that after people in our position, the supervisor, make an observation, I provide my observations for both the CT and for my student teachers, and it can be helpful sometimes for a third party to observe a classroom, and there may be some things that you don't see or that the student teacher doesn't see, and so sometimes sitting down with those comments can offer some conversation points, I think.
So, talking about feedback, how can a cooperating teacher make their feedback more effective for the student teacher?
Okay. And I think if a CT can make time, and this is in all of our copious free time that we have, to watch, I encourage my student teachers to record themselves during any teaching moment, to have a video recording, um, whether it's 5 minutes or 50 minutes, so they can have that for their own self-analysis. And sometimes if the CT can actually find the time to sit down and watch some of those teaching videos with a student teacher, there can really be some specific items that they can address, and they can stop in the moment and talk about here's what happened, here's what you did well, here's what you could have done to kind of. So when you have that in the moment, I think it's very beneficial. But I understand that you can't just rewatch every hour of every day. That's an impossibility. And I just ask the CTs to try and remember what it was like as a first year teacher. All those things that you weren't taught in school, right? You could probably write your own book about those. So how to, sometimes it's budget planning, how to navigate disagreements with other staff in the building, how to avoid burnout. So just a reminder to put yourself in the position of the student teacher.
I'm going to go back to what Chris said earlier. I think providing effective feedback, you can't be afraid to be direct and give examples. If you just tell your student teacher all the time, well, that went well, they might not, or they might misinterpret like, oh, it was my pacing, when it was more of the examples that you chose. So being able to provide examples of where it went well, like you said, and maybe where it needs improvement. I heard a good one this morning. What is your star and what is your wish? Your grow and your glow, and being
Wow.
able to sit down and also, as it require those student teachers to verbalize. Don't let them tell you either, like, oh, I thought my lesson went well. Make them tell you, well, what did you think went well? What
Mm-hmm.
would you change? I think sometimes our student teachers get tired of being reflective, but making them verbalize and not letting them get away either with, oh, I thought it went great, and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
Stick it to them. What went great?
Yeah, great.
I think, but that being direct, don't be afraid to be direct, and give examples.
Great ideas. Yeah, that directness. And that's hard because it's that fine line, isn't it? You don't want to, you're worried, like if you're too direct, you don't want to break them. But if you're not direct enough, they're not going to get it. So,
Yeah.
um, talking about planning, how should the cooperating teacher plan with their student teachers? How and when should a cooperating teacher release the planning responsibilities to the student teacher?
Is it my turn to go first?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I had just had a meeting this morning with a pair, a CT and a student teacher, and we talked about this. And obviously there's a gradual release of responsibility through the semester. And I think you start off with the student teacher observing how you plan. And then I think you know, and maybe it's a feel that you get as a cooperating teacher, but within a week or two, I think you should be dual planning together, requiring that student teacher to take a portion of the lesson, even if it's not the whole lesson. And then eventually you're going to turn that subject over to the student teacher. And it probably depends at what, for elementary, it depends maybe when they're going to pick up that subject. But certainly lots of observation of how the planning process works. A CT probably has to do a little bit more talking aloud, like, this is why I do it this way. Um, but eventually that student teacher should be independently planning the lessons for each of the subjects that are taught in that room, and having that under their belt several weeks before they head teach would probably be a good idea. By the time we get to head teaching, everything should be old hat. And so I think it's a gradual release, and sometimes you get a feel. And of course, some student teachers are going to be ready for that before others. And then certainly you could work with supervisors like Chris and I, and we can help you gauge when we should be cutting the cord. So,
Yeah, great thoughts. I think it's perfectly fine that student teachers are planning their own lessons fairly early on with guidance from you, the CT. And sometimes it's okay that they plan those lessons independent of your guidance. I would love for all of my music education student teachers to have an actual a plan every time they teach anything. And some of you may have experience with EdTPA lesson planning, and the lesson plans they need to be doing for your classes aren't quite as intense as the EdTPA plans, but they need to know what they're going to do. And I think that they should be able to present that lesson plan to you before every time they teach. And I think that after teaching for several years, the CT is understanding enough of lesson planning and their students and the curriculum to take a look and after a minute really know if that's going to fly or not, and you might be able to provide some feedback beforehand before they get in front. But I think that student teachers are able to plan on their own fairly early on. When the CT thinks that the student teacher is almost ready to be alone, I say that's when you give them the shove. Then put them up front when they're almost, and so that way it's because they're not wanting to let you down. They don't want to let the students down, so they're going to do it. They're going to do the best of their ability to really get that lesson taught well. And I think that from the very beginning of the student teacher's placement, the CT should be watching how the student interacts with the students outside of the teaching moments, before, after class, the hallways, lunches. So are the student teachers creating professional boundaries? Are they creating rapport with the students? So I think all of those combined, you can really tell when the students respect them and will follow the student teachers. So that's another tell that they are ready to have the class by their own. And then sometimes if you're not ready to let them have complete ownership of the lesson, it's okay if you ask them to record the lesson, and then that way you can see what happened. I talked about providing feedback, but you can watch it together or on your own time just to make sure that everything worked the way you wanted to for your curriculum and your planning. And my thought, probably the most important consideration is if you as a CT are not quite the type of person that would be comfortable allowing someone else, a student teacher, to take complete control of your lessons, don't be a CT. it sounds a little harsh, but I have had some CTs who the entire time weren't willing to let go of control, and they never left the classroom, and they micromanaged everything that the student teacher did, and I had to step in and advocate on behalf of the student teacher to let them be in charge and to let them have that experience, because that's what this growth process is all about.
I might piggyback on that, and because when Chris was talking about that, I was thinking the same thing. I think, and I know COVID times have been different in the elementary buildings, but it is really important for that CT to step out of the room at times. Obviously, again, it's a gradual release. So in the beginning, maybe you just pop out for 30 minutes, and maybe you're just right around the corner and you can kind of hear things. But I think you have, first of all, that student teacher has to feel the weight of that classroom and all the decision making on their shoulder.
Yeah.
And I think it's good, like you said, Chris, that's what the cooperating teacher should want too, for them to take it over. I just think it's important for the student teachers to feel the weight. And on the flip side, I think it's really important that the students in that classroom see that the CT leaves the room and trusts that student teacher to run things.
Yeah.
I think that's really important for the learners to see.
Absolutely. And to go along with that, that's why we save head teaching towards the end of the semester for when the student's there. Sometimes when I'm going through proposals, I'll see cooperating teachers that will stick head teaching in like starting week 2 or 3. They're really not ready for it. And it's because of this gradual, building up and modeling and working together in lesson planning that's how they become successful instead of just all of a sudden week 2, okay, it's your classroom now. So
Yeah.
we see some extremes, some that don't want to give up any control at all, and some that are like, okay, week 2,
Yeah.
I'm out of here.
True.
So making sure that we're mentoring and saving that head teaching piece towards the end of their experience.
Hmm.
And like Chris said, there's kind of a fine line. We want it to be a win-win situation, right, from the university, that you have an extra set of hands in the room. But really ask yourself, why do you want a student teacher? Are you going to be there for the mentoring process, or did you just want an aid for your classroom?
Yeah.
Because treating our student teachers like they're just your assistant all the time, that's not getting them to be where they need to be either. So there has to be that give and take where you're mentoring and they're observing, and then the roles change. You have to be willing to share your classroom in that way and not view it as, oh, I'm going to get an assistant for a semester. Well, we need you to train that assistant in a good way. So
Hmm.
or I'm leaving for Hawaii for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound too bad right now, but let's talk about goals. Do cooperating teachers ever set goals or help their student teachers set goals for the week? Chris, we'll start with you.
Oh, great. Yes, I believe that one of the considerations for the EdTPA, the context for learning documents, is if there are predetermined factors that would affect the student teacher's teaching experience. And so when a CT has set a goal or a set curriculum or a set concert date, the student teachers indicate this within this document. So if there's something already predetermined, that may affect the pacing of uh, your curriculum that the student teacher still has to teach, but they also have to do their own EdTPA portfolio work at the same time. And so that can be challenging. I think having goals is wonderful, and at the end of the day, the student teachers leave, and the CTs still have to finish the curriculum and the assessments and the rest of the semester. So if there's something important that you need to have accomplished, I think it's absolutely appropriate that you work with your student teacher to say, here is the timeline. But that's also kind of what the student teacher proposal is for at the beginning of that experience. So they really understand in this timeline, in these weeks, here's what has to be accomplished. So I think it's very appropriate that you help to set those goals, and providing an opportunity to justify the rationales for the goals that you develop can be very beneficial for the student teachers. Let them ask why you developed that timeline, those goals. Why do they have to teach it in that time frame?
I I see it quite a bit in elementary. I see a lot of student teachers that set their own goals, or they can iterate to me what their goals are. A lot of it is dispositions, like I'm working on being more patient or things like that. Um Certainly, I worked in one setting where I thought this was great. The CT and the student teacher sat down every Friday and talked about the week, and then the student teacher set a goal for the next week, and the cooperating teacher helped set a goal from their perspective as well. Like, here's what I'm seeing that I think that you can work on, and then the student teacher had one, and then they would share it with me. So it was kind of nice because when I came in to do my observation, then I could see what the goals were. And that particular student teacher really enjoyed that process. So I haven't seen that very often, but it worked well in that setting. So certainly, I think it's great for the cooperating teacher to help the student teacher set goals. And I hope the teachers, and I find that most of them are very reflective and do set their own goals. At least sometimes they're just mental, but they can tell you about them usually when I ask. That's one of the questions I might ask in a conference after the lesson.
All right, let's think about communicating with parents. Um, that's always a fun topic, isn't it? Even as a seasoned teacher. What
Yeah.
role should the student teacher play in communicating with parents? And should the student teacher be directly involved in parent teacher conferences? Betsy, we'll start with you.
Okay. We could ask this on the panel for orientation for the student teachers. I think that it's really important that the elementary student teachers get to observe all of that. How the teacher communicates with the parents through newsletters, emails, phone calls. I think that the student teacher should, at the very minimum, be present in all of the parent teacher conferences and get to observe. Um, I think sometimes there's a little bit more involvement. That's okay. Certainly, I've had some student teachers that have communicated with teachers via email, but the cooperating teacher should always be in on what is being sent out. Nothing should go out that the cooperating teacher has not seen. I would think it would be inappropriate for student teachers to be texting with parents. I think that's where I would draw the line. In terms of parent teacher conferences, I know at different times, the cooperating teacher has had a student teacher take a small portion of the conference, like something that they've taught. So if the student teacher has been doing maybe the writing portion of the day for several weeks, the CT may turn over that little tiny portion of the conference to the student teacher in order to give them practice in talking with the parents. So I've not had student teachers run an entire conference. I think that it's important for the classroom teacher to be, you know, the more present educator there. But certainly I think our student teachers need practice, and they need to be a witness to all of the ways that teachers communicate with parents.
Yeah, right. I'm going to echo several of those comments. I think it's beneficial for student teachers to learn how to communicate with parents. I mentioned those things that are like the potpourri category, the things you don't learn in school. I think how to have a successful parent-teacher conference is one of those things. Acknowledging how a student teacher communicates with parents and families is actually one of the aspects of the student teacher evaluation that the supervisors see. Is like, how well do they communicate, in what ways, is it appropriate? So those are the things that they're evaluated on as they student teach. I've always encouraged my student teachers to be as involved with parent teacher conferences as their CT will allow them to be. um, I think they should attend the conferences, absolutely. Sometimes if it's just being there, they will learn so much by just observing you. um, in every scenario, there will be some very positive scenarios in your conferences, but there will be some very challenging conversations that might happen in student teaching, or in parent teacher conferences. I think that you should make sure to include them and introduce them as they're sitting there, so it's not just this person in the background, um, but also be able to allow the student teacher to hear how you interact with the parents.
You're right. Those are things that it's hard to teach in the college setting, that it's more of
Hmm.
a real life thing. I always tease
Yeah.
my students, it's a great experience to how you word things, and to take notes on how the teacher explains, like, the wheel is spinning but the hamster's dead. How do you go about, professionally talking about concerns or things that you've seen that you want, and sometimes those difficult conversations too. The last piece we're going to talk about are writing letters of recommendations for student teachers.
Hmm.
Again, this is not something you have to do, but it's something that we would certainly encourage you to do, and it certainly helps the student teacher. In our handbook that I sent you early on in the semester, um, electronically, on starting on page 88, there's some helpful tips on how to write letters of recommendation. But I thought, we have supervisors that write lots of letters of recommendations. So, what advice from your perspective do you have about letter writing in general, and maybe what goes into it, or anything else you'd like to include?
Yeah. Okay. Um, I believe that if there are areas of concern with your student teacher, my request is to please address them early on with a student teacher, so that nothing comes as a surprise. If towards the end of their placement, they find out that this entire time you really just hated this one little thing, and that maybe comes out in a letter of recommendation that you decide to write upon, that can be very shocking and difficult to see. But this way, by the time a student teacher asks you to write the letter, that they've addressed it, and you can write the letter in good conscience. Um, there are some things that will improve with time for every student teacher. Their time management, classroom management, addressing discipline issues, and I'm sure several other things you can think of. So be considerate of the items that they will improve upon over time. So when you're writing those lessons, be kind. And then even more so than the student teacher supervisor, you as a CT will know very well the teacher's procedures and philosophy for education and how they think through lessons. So you will know almost every aspect of how the student teacher approaches the art of teaching. And a well-worded positive letter, when appropriate, may be something that the student teacher hangs on to for a long time. It's surprising how that can be a beneficial little artifact for the student to hang on to, and a nice little pick-me-up.
Certainly, I've been asked by different CTs to share examples of recommendation letters, which I keep on file, and then I just change the name of the whatever student it was, so that it's always kept anonymous who I actually wrote the letter for. Change the dates and the names of the schools and all of that. So certainly, probably most of your college supervisors can provide even more samples that than are in the handbook. Sometimes I say it's what's not in the letter that's more important. I think a lot of principals look for certain things, and then if it's not in there, maybe it didn't occur. So I think certainly, um, I think principals and people reading those letters can tell, are you just stating something you observed, or are you actually recommending because of what you saw? Um, so I think I try to cover, kind of the different aspects of teaching, planning, instruction, and management. And I try to provide examples of when or what I saw. And I think probably it's pretty apparent in my letters if my language is more rich and descriptive. And then I use the words at the end, I highly recommend this person. I think it comes across in my letter. Um, how strongly I have felt about recommending that person. So I think Chris is right. Your words are really important, and nothing should be in that letter that wasn't addressed, good, bad, or otherwise. So
And the student teacher handbook really does provide some really great examples of how to phrase things when they maybe haven't been the best teacher candidate in that placement. And you can take a look through that and see how that might fit your personality as you write your own letters.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I have for you for today. But before we sign off, for the cooperating teachers out there, I would just like to say again a very big thank you. Thank you for stepping into the role of being a cooperating teacher and being a mentor. I know it's not an easy thing. I know it takes up extra time, and we wouldn't be able to do this without you. Basically, we rely on your willingness to do this, so we are so appreciative, and thank you. So let's all throw virtual chocolates at our cooperating.
I like it.
So that's good. All right. Again, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Betsy. You're model supervisors. I appreciate you imparting your wisdom.
I
Yeah,
learned a lot
you're
from
welcome.
Chris. I just learned a lot from Chris. So
It's good to have these conversations. All right. Thank you.